Welcome to episode 3 of Settling's Not an Option. I'm Adam Nebbs, and I'm here with my co-host, Amanda Stanhope. This show is for anyone out there who feels like they've settled for an unfulfilling life. Whether you've settled in a relationship, the work that you do, or how you feel about yourself, we're here to tell you that settling is not an option. So far, we've heard Amanda's story in episode 1 and my story in episode 2. And in both episodes, the topic of ego came up quite a bit, particularly in my story. So we figured that the next logical thing for us to talk about was our egos, specifically how our egos convince us to settle for an unfulfilling life. First, we should probably offer up a definition of ego. So at this point, I will throw over to Amanda. She has posted a lot about ego on the Expectation Gaps, her content website. So she has a much better grasp, I suppose, as to what ego looks like. So throwing over to you, Amanda.
All right, thank you, and thanks for the plug for the Expectation Gaps there.
No worries.
Which I was going to plug if you didn't plug it, so that worked. But it is fun to set up this definition of ego for everyone, so we're all on the same page as we go into the discussion here. But because a lot of people think of ego as some kind of bravado of some sort, or some kind of pretentiousness, or someone who just is puffed up and thinks a lot of themselves. And that can be a part of ego, but that's not necessarily ego in the sense that we're going to be talking about today. So today we're talking about it more in the way that a psychologist would talk about it. And that would be to think of ego as your inner voice, or your voice of reason. It kind of the voice in your head that keeps you on the straight and narrow. It kind of tells you if you are headed in a safe direction or maybe an unsafe direction, and kind of gives you that red light, green light. That's part of what ego does, but ego also is part of what creates your identity. And so I also wanted to just quickly read this definition of ego that I found from this psychologist whose name I'm going to slaughter, but he's a clinical psychologist. His name is Greg Enrique, I would say. But anyways, his definition is that it's the narrating portion, the ego is the narrating portion of human consciousness that reflects on one's thoughts, feelings, and actions. So it's when you're thinking about your own thoughts, feelings, and actions, and then you either inhibit or legitimize your thoughts, feelings, or actions based on what you're thinking in your head. And so you legitimize them either to yourself or to others. And in this sense, ego is very similar to what is meant by the term identity. So ego is kind of in charge of your identity, and it's also in charge of keeping you safe. And we can get into the details on that a bit more later as we get into the discussion here. But just to set that up as a definition of ego that we're going to be using. And as Adam said, our ego has come up in our discussions quite a bit, and it seems to come up more when we're talking about Adam's past and the experiences that Adam has had and is having. So I'm going to just let him kind of talk about how ego has caused him to settle in his life. And maybe that can help whoever's listening out there kind of recognize that in themselves.
Yeah, happy to. So I think I referred to it as my ego journey, and it's a journey that I'm still on. But for those who didn't listen to episode 2, I previously worked in the finance industry for 10 years. And I'd have to say that in the beginning, ego was a great thing. I really liked when all things were going my way. Mm-hmm. So I was receiving recognition, good money, good benefits, good friendships, that came out of ego. And that was very much my identity. But the issue with that is when you're not receiving recognition, when those, people that were previously there lifting you up aren't there anymore, your ego starts to turn on itself, and it becomes quite a destructive thing. Not only for you, but for those around you. I think it definitely throws your energy off. So I think it is interesting to just be aware of when your ego is driving what you do, because 9 times out of 10, it probably will drive you in the wrong direction if you're not aware of it.
Well, and how did you, or I guess when did you realize that it was driving you, or didn't you realize that until after you were already? So just to back up a little bit, so you left the banking world and are now on a completely different path to get your PhD in workplace mental health, which is awesome. So did you realize that ego was driving you to stay in banking when you were in banking still, or was it after the fact?
I think I first realized when I was still in banking, but I don't think the proper realization came until afterwards. It was a case where, you know, when I was quite early on in being a manager, and I very much wanted to be the best manager there ever was.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of my actions were orientated towards myself. And my team could sense that. And that created a lot of conflict between me and my team. And it was probably epitomized at one point where we had this email that came out from the executive manager every month, which was team leader of the month. And I told everyone in sundry, I want to be the team leader of the month. Like, that's what my goal is. You know, my goal wasn't to be a good team leader and look after my people. It was, I want to be the best.
Okay.
And I made this known to everyone. And I'm kind of glad I did do that. But all of these more mature leaders sat back, probably chuckling to themselves.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
But just, you know, that day never come. You know, every month it was somebody else. And it started to frustrate me. And then I was able to sit down and have a chat to my leader at the time, who is now one of my really, really good friends. And he was quite frank just to say, we just think you're very selfish. You only think about yourself. You really don't care about your team. And that's probably why you're not progressing. So that was a really good wake-up call for me. But I do have to say that there were many other times where ego popped up. And it wasn't until later on that I actually got better at being able to go, hold on, that's a bit of an egotistical or, you know, egoistic thought.
Yeah, sure. You start recognizing it. Well, it's just like anything else, I guess. It comes with practice.
Yeah.
You start recognizing it. But it's interesting that, because I think you would agree that just being in the banking world, you were kind of settling, because you're settling for, you know, safe option, an option where you knew you could be successful, etc. And there's money and all this stuff. So you're already settling that way. But then by trying to be the best at whatever you're doing, you were also kind of settling, maybe without even knowing it, but you were almost settling for being subpar. Because, you know, your ego is getting in the way of exactly what you were trying to accomplish. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was it, really. I think what the problem with ego can be is it can get in the way. I think it can cloud your vision of what really matters. You know, it takes over. So that's why you need to accept it. And I think that's a really important part of Amanda's post, is it's learning to accept it and not identify it as an enemy, because it is an important part of us that will always be there. But just to kind of look at it and sometimes critically think about it and say, all right, well, appreciate you that you're there, but, you know, I think you're probably clouding my vision of what really matters right now. So I think that was definitely a big cloud that obstructed my view of what really mattered.
Right. And just to kind of piggyback on that thought a little bit, and I kind of alluded to the fact that that is part of ego's job, is to protect you. And just to go into that a little bit more too, so ego will look at your ego, and I'm talking about it like it's a third person, but that's just the easiest way to think of it. So that's just the easiest way to think of it, but it kind of is in a way, because it's not really you. It's this other voice in your head. And you know, we get kind of metaphysical here, but if you can hear this voice in your head, it's not you. It's something else. Exactly. So it is kind of its own thing. So anyway, so ego will then look at, ego, like I said, is trying to protect you. So what it does, and just case in point with you, is what it does is it looks at what's going on around you and how are other people being successful, how are other people staying safe. And, you know, in our societies, we think in order to be safe, we have to have money, we have to have, obviously you have to have a house, but you know, we often tend to think too that we have to have more house than we need to have, and all these other possessions. We think we need all these material things to be safe. And so of course, in order to get those material things, you need to be successful in your work. And so then in order to be successful in your work, you think that you have to create this identity that is maybe like the super identity, like the super bank manager, you know, and you're just trying to create this identity of being the best, or what do you say it was, something of the month?
Oh, yeah, so it was like manager of the month or
Yeah,
something
so
like
you're like trying to be manager of the month so that you can create a safety net for yourself so that your ego says, oh, we're safe, we're going to survive. You know, so that's kind of just to kind of pull it all together for whoever is listening or watching, that's exactly how the ego works. And that's exactly, and like you said, it's not a bad thing. Your ego is very wise because your ego is taking in everything that's ever happened to you. It's taking in everything that's it's ever witnessed happen to anybody else. And so it's taking all that information and it's telling you how you should react, how you should feel, what you should do in any given situation to keep yourself safe. That's really what it's doing in a nutshell. So
it is, yeah. And I think one of the things I really like most about Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth was what he talked about in relation to the ego, which is you can understand or identify the ego because it's always waiting for a future event to occur.
Oh, good point.
So, you know, you say, oh, I'm going to be happy in this moment because it's a nice sunny day. And then you go, say, yeah, look, that's great, but we probably need it to be sunnier, or we need, you know, these other things to pop up. Then you're allowed to be happy. You're just not allowed to be happy yet because we still need to get to this future state, you know? So, and that's something I've found is that you are always striving, you know? So, you know, to the example of the manager of the month, you're always striving for something. You're not able to sit there in that moment and say, well, I'm quite happy right now, and that's okay. I don't need any more, I suppose.
Well, and even if you were in the moment and focusing on what was really truly important in that moment, you would probably get manager of the month.
Yeah,
you know, because
it's a funny kind of process.
You don't have, it's so often that the things we're actually focused on we don't get because we're so focused on this huge accomplishment that we miss all the little things that you had to do along the way to get there.
Yes.
And so yeah, that's just such an interesting example. It's like a perfect example of how ego can just get in the way and yeah, and like you say, cause you to settle in your life and in your career.
And a question for you: can you think of any times in your life where your ego has served you, like in a good light? You know, where something good's come out of living through your ego.
I'm sure it has. Let me think here a second. So,
sorry to throw that one at you. It's a tricky question.
I'm just trying to think because you always think, here's my ego working, okay? Because my ego
what's the best answer?
My ego's but it's coming up with all the ways that it worked against me instead of telling me how it actually helped me. But so I'm really struggling to think of one. Can you think of one?
No, I think I couldn't think of a specific example, but I could just say that I think it helps lead you ultimately down the right path.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
It's when you start to identify that it's you know, trying to think critically about a situation, and that can be helpful at times because you think, oh, thanks for raising those concerns there, ego. I appreciate, you know, having the heads up there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you can choose whether to run with it or just a part of it or just ignore it entirely. So I think, you know, I couldn't think of any specific examples, but lately it's just been probably what I could perceive as negative things. But then later I go, oh, actually, that was an egotistical kind of thought. cool, I'll just, I'm aware of that. And that makes me feel good being aware of it, I guess.
100%. Yeah. And I guess that's what I'm thinking too, is like now, like today, yes, I'm very aware of my ego. And I wouldn't say always, because that's a stupid thing to say, but I would say most of the time I can identify when my ego is talking to me. But I was trying to think of something before when I wasn't as aware. I wasn't as self-aware. I wasn't aware of what ego was or what its job was or whatever. I was trying to think of back then if it ever served me, which obviously it did in some way. But yeah, but I'm still trying to think of something for some reason.
I think it's hard to pinpoint.
I know, we'll come back to it if I think of it. But I guess that's kind of a good maybe segue to the next part, maybe to help understand the ego a bit too, is, so in my post that I wrote, the essay that I posted down, the expectation gaps, I too referenced 3, what does he call them? It's from Dr. Wayne Dyer, and he called them 3 aspects of ego that he said led us to become ambitious, but not ambitious in a good way, like ambitious where you're like, I'll go back to the bank manager thing. Like you weren't going after, or not bank manager, manager of the month, I mean. Like you weren't going after manager of the month because it's really what you wanted to do and it was going to lead you to a fulfilling life and it was going to make you happy and give meaning to your life and all this stuff. And so in that, it was ambitious because you weren't necessarily doing it for good reasons or, so that's what he means by that your ego is, that there's 3 aspects of ego that lead you to become ambitious. And he said they were, thinking to yourself, I am what I have, I am what I do, and I am what other people think of me. So far, I think we kind of maybe already hit all 3 in this bank manager example, because definitely I am what I do was wrapped up in that role and wrapped up in your ego at that time. Definitely what other people think of you, because you wanted everyone to think you were the best bank manager in the land. Sorry, I'm picking on you a little bit here.
No, I'd pick on me too.
I know, it's fine. It'll come back to me. And then as far as I am what I have, well, obviously I know you've talked about it, that you were making quite a good deal of money. And so I imagine you had material things too. So that's kind of all wrapped up in that one example.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think the big one is probably what people think of me.
Yeah.
And I think that can really, I think for a lot of people, obstruct our authentic selves.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly trying to adapt who you are to, your surroundings, the people you're with, because you think if I act in a particular way, they will like me more. And that's ultimately because you feel that, if I don't have others, who like who I am, I'm no one, my identity is going to be destroyed. I think it's, we're very dramatic people sometimes. We think we're going to be annihilated based on other people's opinions, but it's really not true.
Yeah. Well, and it's not only that either. There's a much more basic instinct to it, in that our brains, as well developed as they are, they still kind of think we're in the caveman era, where you had to rely on a tribe or you had to rely on a group of people to survive. And so we still have that hardwired in us. Well, I mean, we still need people to survive, don't get me wrong, but we don't need people in the same way that we needed people then. It's very different now. But our brains still are like, oh, if I get outcast, I'm not even going to be able to survive. Like, just physiologically, I'm not going to be able to survive. So that's part of what comes into play too. So it's not just a psychological, it's a physiological, where your body's saying, I need these people to survive. I need to be part of this group. So there's a lot at play. It's really a lot to contend with.
Yeah, I think a lot of things come back to, that kind of wiring of our brain,
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with anxiety and things like that, is,
Sure.
the fight or flight responses. We feel threatened in situations, but, they quite often talk about, our brain's mechanism to adapt when a tiger comes along, but there's no real tigers in society anymore. It's
Right,
only the tigers that we create in our minds.
Right.
So yeah, I guess it again comes back to that awareness. As long as you're aware, saying my brain comes from probably a more primordial place, where things were different, but it's still operating in that way. I just need to be aware of it operating in that way, so it doesn't impede who I am and what I do.
Exactly. And I think so many people, well, I mean, I know I didn't realize that for a long time. I mean, I've really only probably come to realize that within the last year, because I've been studying it a lot. Not just ego, but just generally gaining self-awareness. And so I know I can say this with pretty good certainty that most people don't have any clue that that's what's going on in their brain. And I really feel like if they did know, and like you said, if they become aware that they can use that for good, they can use that to help push them forward, they can use it to guide them. You don't have to listen. Well, no, you should listen to your ego, but you don't have to do what it's saying. Like, you should take it into account, but that doesn't mean you have to listen to what it's saying. And I feel like if people realize that, they would be much more likely to stop settling in their lives, and much more likely to take a leap of faith or make a huge change in their life when they know they're not happy with their situation. They know there's something better for them out there. They know that they aren't taking care of themselves the way that they should be taking care of themselves. Just that little bit of awareness just seems like it could go such a long way. So that's why I'm so glad we're talking about this today.
Yeah, well, I suppose what would be some key ways for people to gain that awareness? I think you and I have both probably obtained our awareness in similar ways.
Right.
But yeah, for somebody out there who's literally tuning out thinking, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't think I'm operating through my ego, but they really are.
Right.
What are some strategies do you think they could employ?
Or ways that they could recognize it?
Yeah.
So I think part of it is, one way to recognize it is anytime that you're starting to have self-doubt, you're starting to hear, or maybe you're going to try something new, or you need to have a confrontation with someone for not a bad confrontation, but you need to talk to somebody about something uncomfortable, whatever the case may be. All of a sudden your brain starts saying, start doubting yourself. It's trying to protect you. It's saying you're not good enough. You don't know what you're talking about. You need to just keep your mouth shut and just keep going along, so we're good right here. We're safe. We're surviving. Let's just keep surviving. We don't need to go do anything else. So I think that's your first clue, is when all of a sudden your inner voice, like I said, starts telling you that you're not good enough, or that you shouldn't try something because you don't know how to do it, or whatever that case may be. That's your first clue. And I gotta say, that's gotta happen to everybody every single day, multiple times. And I'm very aware of it, and it happens to me all the time. So I think it should be pretty easy to spot. I also think another way you spot it is when you start feeling triggered by someone else's opinion of you. That's your ego talking. Your ego is telling you that you are who people think you are. And I think I still do get triggered by, like, if you get a negative comment from someone, or just any negative communication with someone or interaction with someone, that'll still take me back for a second. But now I can recognize right away that that's my ego talking. And if it's somebody that I don't particularly value their opinion very much anyway, I can right away tell myself, I don't really care what they think about me. So anyways, I think that's the second thing you would notice is, when you're getting hung up on too much on what other people think of you. And then if you go to what I have, if you're too hung up, if you start noticing that you are being very stressed out about having to have certain material possessions, or you start noticing that, your neighbor gets a new car and all of a sudden you're like, well, I need to get a new car, or what, whatever. I think there's all these little triggers that you're going to, if you start paying attention, all these things are going to show you that your ego is talking to you.
Yeah. Well, to that point, in Australia, with everything that's happened with COVID-19, is the government's allowed people to release their superannuation early, just to help them out. Do you guys have superannuation in America?
I'm like, what is that word? I'm learning.
Geez,
I'm
cool.
learning a new word today. Okay, so what is it?
Well, for any viewers that don't have superannuation, it's basically your employer will set aside money for your retirement.
Oh,
okay. So, like a certain amount of money will go into this pool of money that you can access when you reach your retirement age.
Yep.
So we've all got money, or hopefully a lot of us have got money sitting there that's building up for retirement, but the government has just released, allowed people to release a certain amount of money to help them out during the tough times. Now, obviously, the purpose of that was, to keep people afloat while it's really uncertain. But there's definitely been a phenomena in which it's keeping up with the Joneses, which is something that Amanda mentions in the expectation gaps. Plug again. And
we'll have to count the number of plugs that we get.
But what's happened is, people are buying cars, or people are, doing things with that money that it's really not intended for, and a good case in point is car dealerships are actually doing better than ever, because people are going, well, I just saw my neighbor drive in with this new car. I want a new car, and it's it shows that in times, where we really should be doing the right thing, our government, is trying to support people. We are allowing our egos to get in the way and use those things, which ultimately, and I'm probably getting too financial here, but I can't help myself. No, this is going to have detrimental effects to these people when they go to retire. They're going to have a lot less money set aside to help them, as they move forward. But they've allowed their ego to make a decision for them right now, just so that somebody can say, oh, wow, you've got a really nice new car at the moment. So it's just being aware of that in our decision making. And also, to Amanda's point, I think it is something that the next time somebody triggers you, whether you're talking about the election going on in America at the moment, or you're talking about politics in Australia, or, any kind of big opinion thing that causes a lot of dichotomy. If you start to find yourself getting frustrated and wanting to bite back and tell them they're wrong and convince them they're wrong, probably going to be your ego. And you need to realize that, is there any point? Because now it's going to be a clash of two egos, and really no one wins. The actual you, the awareness behind your ego, doesn't win, because it can't be damaged or harmed by being right or wrong. It's only your ego that can be damaged by that.
Yeah, 100%.
I got a bit philosophical there, sorry.
No, that's great. I love it. The seat, I don't know I know you follow, how does he pronounce it? Eckhart Tolle or Tolle?
Well, see, Russell Brand the other day said Eckhart Tolle, but I looked up before episode, and it's Eckhart Tolle. So
I thought so too. But now, does he talk about the seat of consciousness?
He talks mainly about the awareness behind.
That's what you just described, but I didn't know if he used that terminology or not.
Yeah, and I like that, because I think it links to what you said earlier, which is, if you can see something or you can hear it, even kind of moving into quantum mechanics, which I know nothing about, but I know that's probably one small component. We can hear that voice in our head. So if we can hear it, we're not that. We're not the ego, because we're hearing the ego. We are the awareness behind it. And when we look at it that way, we can go, it's interesting. You can observe it and be the observer, I think is what Eckhart Tolle calls it. Yeah. And that, observation really helps you, because sometimes you actually turn around and you laugh. At least 100%. I do. Maybe I'm going crazy. But, I'll laugh and I'll go, really? Is that what we're thinking right now? No, I'm not running with that. And it's quite satisfying. But sometimes you will get caught up in it. And maybe it's because there's a lot of stresses going on or other things. But sometimes you will get caught up in that dialogue and identify with it when you shouldn't.
Right, exactly. Well, and that happens to everyone. And I think that's another important point to make is, so I think the best way that you're ever going to, I say conquer your ego, but you don't want to conquer your ego, first of all. You want to integrate with it. You want to work with it because you're both working for the same thing, really. You both are trying to protect yourself and become the best that you can be. So you just want to learn to work with it. And I think the best way that you're going to do that is you have to sit with yourself and gain self-awareness and figure out who you really are. Figure out what your core values are, what's most important to you, what gives meaning to your life, you know, what gets you going in the morning, what gets you wanting to, you know, take on the day, all these things. And that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. And so I don't want to make it sound like it's something easy to do and that I have somehow mastered the art of taming my ego, because I'm far from it. You know, it's what I just want people to also know that it takes a long time. It's probably, and I don't know if you ever tame it, so it's something you're going to deal with every single day. The only thing that you do is you get better at recognizing it sooner, and you get better at talking to yourself and talking to your ego and saying, yeah, ego, I hear what you're saying, but we're cool, we got this. You know, I understand you don't want me to try this new podcast with Adam because I've never done a podcast before, but I got this, ego. We can do this. You know, things like that, because even that, I mean, my first reaction was, my ego first said, no, you can't do that. You've never done a podcast before. You can't do that. You don't have anything important to say to anybody. But that only lasted a split second, where before that might have lasted a week before I could, and maybe I would have never even made the decision to say, yes, let's do a podcast together. And if I did, it would have taken me a lot longer to get to that.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. Like I said, I think that your ego is just there. You're gonna battle with it a little bit every day, your whole life.
Yes.
But there are ways to, you know, use it to your advantage, I guess.
And I think that's a really good point, because we don't want to create the expectation in people that somehow you're going to get rid of your ego.
Right.
It's always going to be there, and some days will be easier than others, but it is just recognizing things, because ultimately it gets in the way of gratitude as well. Like,
True.
You know, I swear the little things that you were talking about, and there was a quote the other day on that. I can't remember what it was. I posted it on LinkedIn. So go to LinkedIn if you'd like to find out more. And it was just, you know, you'll miss those little things, which later down the track could be the big things.
Yeah.
And it's so true, you know, just enjoying a moment, you know, enjoying just, little things you will miss because you're looking ahead, you know, and that's still manifested in this new journey for me into doing my PhD.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I don't know why it's in there and it's frustrating, but again, I've got more awareness of it now. Right. Is my brain went, well, I want to be the best PhD student in the world. And I was like, what are you doing? That's an unrealistic expectation that will never, ever come to fruition. I think that's another thing with the ego, is it puts these expectations on you that are just unachievable. You know, or if you do achieve what the ego wants you to achieve, there'll always be something else. It'll go, you know, it'll kind of get caught up in that, I think they call hedonistic treadmill.
Yeah.
Where there's always going to be something else, and you'll constantly be running on that treadmill and you'll never be satisfied. Whereas if you take pause and say, okay, I'm just going to look for some things to enjoy today, and I can guarantee you will find something. Even if you're just sitting at home right now, you will find things today that you will enjoy if you don't allow your ego to manifest in a negative way.
Exactly. Well, and even to play on that a little bit too. So to say that I want to be the best, what did you say you want? Not best PhD.
I want to be the best, basically just the best of everything. I think whatever I do, I want to be the best at this job or this enterprise. Yeah, it's annoying. But, you know, it's nice I can see it.
It was the best, not best PhD student, but best something.
Yeah, I think it was best PhD student.
What is that even? That
I don't even know.
Well, anyways, really. The point is, so the point is, right there, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because even though your ego is trying to protect you, it's also setting you up for failure at the same time, which is interesting, but that's a whole other topic. But the point is, if you just, one way people can deal with that, because I think a lot of people have the same thing. Obviously we all, or not all, I gotta stop using these type of words, but many people want to be the best at whatever they're doing, and they want to grow, they want to achieve something. But if you start, one way to conquer that thought, I think, is if you start breaking it down. So, and start thinking about, okay, what does it take to be a PhD student? So a PhD student, I imagine, needs to be good at working with people. A PhD student needs to be good at writing. A PhD student needs to be good at research. So if you start breaking it down and say, instead of being the best PhD student, I want to improve my writing skills. I want, that's something you can do, and you can see that happening, and that's going to lead you to be the best PhD student. So I would just throw that out to people, that when you start having those thoughts of, I want this grandiose thing, start breaking it down into pieces of what is included in that grandiose thing, and because you're not going to get there, or you're not going to get there immediately. But maybe if you break it down into little pieces, you can get those little pieces. And all of a sudden, as you start meeting all those little goals along the way, like, oh, all of a sudden I'm a better writer, I'm better at researching now, I'm better at whatever else you do as a PhD student. I have no idea what PhD students do, so I'm just making all this up. But whatever you need to do. So as you start getting better at all those little things, all of a sudden you're going to find that your life is more meaningful, and that you're enjoying your life. You're going to be more grateful because you're meeting all these little goals along the way.
That's it, definitely. I think you can, if you break it down, like don't let yourself build up these giant, unrealistic goals, because right. I think, when I took away that giant pressure, I could be reading an article and really taking it in and find it incredibly exciting and interesting. I like that feeling of learning something new.
Yeah.
That's a really important thing for me, which has kind of led me to this decision. But, I'm able to enjoy it, going like, wow, this is so cool. Or it could be, geez, that was a good cup of tea. Like, I'm on fire today with my, cup of tea making. You can enjoy it. You're not, you're not being
with my cup of tea making.
I love a good cup of tea. That's something that PhD students do, I think.
Okay. Fair enough. I said I don't know what they do, so I can't argue.
You guys drink a lot of tea in America?
Oh, no. I mean, yes, we do drink tea. However, I don't think that it's as big of a thing as it is there. I would imagine we're more coffee drinkers, probably.
You're more coffee, okay, yeah.
Yeah, there's like a Starbucks on every corner.
As a side venture, this is where I can learn more about America, and Amanda can learn more about Australia.
Yeah, see, I already learned a new word today, which I don't even remember what it was. But
graduation. I love it.
So, anyways, back to ego. I was going to follow that up with a thought, too. Let's see here. So, what I was going to say is, too, when you break up your big ambition into smaller bite-sized pieces, your ego can't argue with you, because when you're saying, I want to be the best blank, your ego's like, you're not going to be the best blank, you can't do that, that all these people are so far above you already, you're never going to catch up with them. But if your ego can't argue with you if you just say, I want to improve this specific skill. If you know what I mean, like your ego can't say, well, you can't improve in this skill. Like that's just not how your ego works. So that just kind of takes that side of the ego out of the equation, so that then your ego is just helping you become better instead of working against you.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
So part of that recognition is that you need to break it into small pieces. Like, is that something that people need to do?
Yeah, 100%. I believe so. I believe that's the only way that you can really, so if you look at I am what I have, that's pretty obvious. And that one's pretty easy. I'm not saying it's easy to overcome that, because some people are very wrapped up in their material possessions, but it's obvious and you know what you need to change. I am what other people think of me, that's pretty obvious, and you know what you need to change, whether it's easy to change or not. But I am what I do, that's a lot harder to change, because our identities are so wrapped up in what we do, because that's the first thing people ask you when you meet them usually is, oh, what do you do? And so it's so wrapped up, and that's the one that I think the only way to conquer that voice is, or that message that you're receiving, is to break that down. So I am what I do. So I could say that I'm an accountant or I'm a writer. Okay. But what the skills that are included in that, so as a writer, I also have to, I analyze information, I communicate, and I create things. And so, I can say I'm a creator, I'm a communicator, all these things that can be carried over to something else. So if I'm not a writer anymore, I can still take all those traits and all those skills with me to something else. And so then that kind of breaks apart that whole wrapping up your identity and what you do.
I think that's great. So maybe that's a good way of resolving that fear that we're going to be annihilated, because as you were speaking, then I was thinking about, okay, how does this work? But as you say, rather than it being, I am Amanda the accountant, and then all of a sudden, oh, I've lost my job as the accountant. Right. Oh my gosh, who am I? Which is probably happening a lot right now across the world.
With people, sure.
Instead, it's, I am Amanda who enjoys critical thinking, numbers, right, various things that accountants do. And that's still translatable. Whether you go into another profession or not, you still enjoy numbers. You still enjoy, critical thinking or whatever it may be.
Yep, exactly. Or data analysis or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And so any job or any career, you can break down into all the little pieces, all the traits, all the skills that you have to perform that function. And then all of a sudden you can translate that over to hundreds of other jobs.
I've got a question about relationships. Okay. And it's about, I suppose, just relationships in general. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. Friendships, relationships, I suppose they all come under the same banner. Sure. But so many of us, I think, change our behavior based on the circle that we're with. So I was having a discussion with my partner the other day, and me and Amanda touched on this briefly. But, I said I could acknowledge that certain friends of mine changed when we were in different groups. And I'm sure I change as well. I know I change.
Yeah.
And so we were having a bit of a discussion about, is that something we should stop doing, or is it okay for us to do that? Mm-hmm. And so we kind of, both of us went back and forth, and I still very much firmly believe that we shouldn't be doing that. But I'm curious. But, what do you think? Do you think...
Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you.
You're laughing with me?
Yes.
But maybe that's ego. You were thinking about ego then, weren't you? Being ego.
Yes, because you're because all right, I guess I would say that you don't have to. However, you don't have to portray yourself the same way. How am I going to say this? I just wrote about this too, so I'm not going to say it as eloquently as I wrote it. But of course, you're going to act different with different people, because different people have different impacts on your life. You're more invested with some people than you are with others. And so you're going to give them different energy than you give other people. So I think it's not so much about acting, or there's just certain people that just bring out a different side of you, than other people do. So it's not about acting the same with everybody, but I think as long as you stay true to your core values and you stay true to what's important to you across whoever you're communicating with, whether it be colleagues, whether it be your family, whether it be friends or acquaintances or whoever, as long as you're consistent about who you are and what's important to you, I think that that's going to keep your ego in check in those cases. And you are still being true to yourself. You're not being fake. And I guess that's a better way to put it. At that point, you're not being fake. You're just letting out the feelings that you're getting from that person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because different people are going to cause you to react in different ways or cause you to have different feelings. And really, to me, that's all that that's not all that it is with everybody, because some people are putting on a facade, but if you can still be true to yourself and act different with different people.
It does, yeah.
I don't know if I'm just talking in circles here.
No. I think the specific example, and it might help kind of to contextualize it a bit better for me, was a case where I suppose in settings where it's just the guys hanging out together.
Sure.
And I think in society this is an issue, a bigger issue that might be a topic for another time, but as a man, you're expected to behave in a certain way.
Sure.
There's always going to be this alpha male relationship, I suppose, in these settings when you're out with your mates. And so what I found is that I've got certain friends, and I definitely demonstrate these tendencies too, is where what we perceive as an alpha male comes in, who needs to be the blokey bloke, who speaks in a certain way, they come into the group.
Sorry, I'm laughing at blokey bloke. Yeah. I couldn't help it.
Just everyone talks about blokes here.
Blokey bloke. Anyway, sorry.
They come into the group and behavior changes, So where we'd be talking about something before that might be a little bit more aligned to, even talking about emotions or feelings of, insecurity with something. Sure. The alpha comes into the group and, we're not talking about that topic anymore. Right. We need to talk about serious masculine things. Yeah. And that's something I've noticed, that changes. And I almost perceive that, I suppose, as detrimental, because I think, well, why are we allowing that to happen? Firstly, is that alpha male really an alpha male? Is that really how we as men should behave?
Right.
I don't know. Should we all, people who aren't the alpha males, should they adjust their behavior, and who they really are, I suppose, because somebody like that comes into the group? So I guess that's the kind of scenario I was thinking about.
Okay. Well, yeah, and that's a tough one, because that goes back to, I am what people think of me, and you want that alpha male. Well, you're trying to fit into the group at that point. So you're trying to meld everyone together. Well, and you're trying, I don't know, it's almost like you don't want to cause any conflict either, because then you just all want to talk about a topic that you're all comfortable with.
Yes, that's it.
So there's a lot at play there.
There is a lot at play, and it probably comes down to, what we said before. We were talking about ego, and is the ego more likely to come out in males? I think that's definitely something that we should talk about.
Do you want to talk about that now? Is that what you're saying?
We could probably flesh it out. Yeah, we could flesh it
All
out.
right. I didn't know if you were trying to set that up for a future talk or. Okay. I know, because I am curious about that, because as I was kind of preparing for this recording, well, and just kind of the conversations that we've had that led to this recording, obviously the ego kept coming up more with your story than with mine, although ego definitely came into play in mine, no doubt about it. But I feel like maybe there is something to it that I think that men and women both have ego, but I think maybe we interact with it very differently, if that makes sense. Most women, although not all, but I would think that most women aren't looking necessarily for titles and bravado, and although there's a lot of them out there that are, but it seems like that's part of ego is more of a male thing.
And I think so.
With women, it's more, I feel like it's more in what we are offering to others, or how we are helping others, like how we're taking care of our families, or like how we're contributing to our employer. And those types of things is where our ego will come into play, and feeling like we're not giving enough. Like, I feel like women are always expected to give all the time. And so that's where our ego comes in and says, you're a woman, you're supposed to give yourself 100% to your family. And then if you work, you have to give yourself 100% to your work and 100% to your family somehow. So yeah. I think maybe that's the difference, is that for men, it's more about acquiring things like possessions or prestige or respect. And for women, it's more about providing things. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So it definitely comes into play of who we think we're supposed to be, but it's almost competing ways that it manifests itself.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I think I am curious to talk more about, and so maybe we definitely have an episode somewhere down the track on masculinity and femininity, because I don't know enough about it and I want to know more. But I definitely think there is a lot more egotistical tendencies in men, and I'd quite comfortably say that that's probably the cause of a lot of issues that we have today. Not naming any specific scenarios, but I think we just look at that and think there are a lot of issues at play in the world right now, and how many of those could be avoided if people weren't operating through that ego.
Right. And the same for women. I think there's a lot of problems caused by women spreading themselves too thin and not knowing what's more important to me, my family or my career, or there's other things, my friends, my social life, and trying to balance all of these things. And men balance all those things too, but it's just, I do believe it's different for women. And I think that spreading yourself so thin that you can't give your best self to any of those groups. You're giving only the what's left over of yourself to all of those groups, and that leads to a lot of problems too. It's not as obvious. Like the way the male ego manifests itself is a lot more obvious, but the female ego definitely has a lot of detrimental effects as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So yes, we'll have to flush that out.
No, that was good. That's really good. So I'm definitely keen to note that down as a topic that we discuss.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
The interplay between, the feminine and the masculine.
Mm-hmm.
But to summarize it, what would your 3 key points be around ego that you want people to take away today?
Okay, so I would say number 1 is just to start listening for your ego, not to your ego, but listen for it. That's the first step. So listen when that self-doubt starts creeping in, or when you start hearing yourself say you're not good enough, or that you can't do something, or when you're being triggered by someone. Notice that. That's number 1. Number 2, once you do notice that, try to put in perspective what's going on. How are you feeling? What situation are you in? And start noticing when your ego is talking to you, what situations you're in, what people you're with, and maybe there's some changes you need to make there in your life. And then third, I think the way, like I said before, so that's just kind of recognizing your ego and starting to maybe change your situation that you're in when your ego's talking to you. But to really get to the bottom of your ego, what it's going to take is you have to dedicate time to sit with yourself. No TV, no music, not reading, not doing anything. You're just sitting by yourself in silence, meditating, whatever you want to call it, and really listening to yourself and what your seat of consciousness is trying to tell you, instead of what your ego is trying to tell you. That's the only way that you're going to ever really integrate your ego with your true identity.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think there's some really important takeaways. I think we've got some non-optional questions.
Yes. So we have non-optional questions normally for guests, but since we don't have guests today, they're going to be for the audience.
All right,
Do you want to fire those out?
I can shoot those off. I'm super prepared, everybody. This is reality, though. So the first question I want you guys to ask yourself is, what is a lie that your ego tells you repeatedly? And I'm sure we've got many, many of those. The second question, why do you tend to believe this lie? And are you willing to keep believing this lie and in the process allow yourself to settle? So remember, the whole core purpose of our podcast series is not to settle. And one component we talked about was not settling in how you perceive yourself, because I think so many of us are not comfortable in who we are. We don't take that time, as Amanda said, to sit down and be with ourselves, because being with ourselves, I've somehow moved my camera, sorry, but being with ourselves can be uncomfortable because you might not like what you see. Right. So it's easier to run out and be with others and validate yourself through others' opinions, using ego. But that's also something that can lead you down a really negative path. So just realize that being with yourself is a really good opportunity to not settle. You'll probably find things in there that will be so much more meaningful to you than, somebody's opinion of you or how you wrap yourself up in these ego kind of views.
Yep, 100%.
Excellent. So some exciting news. We've had a few guests who are quite keen to join us. So stay tuned. We won't mention any details, but Amanda and myself will be touching base with some people, and stay tuned on the socials.
All right. You want to?
Thanks very much.
Give her a tagline.
Yes, settling's not an option.
No, I'll do it.
What is
Cheers
the tagline?
to not settling.
Cheers to not settling. Cheers. Sorry, guys.
We'll see you next time, guys.
See you guys.